This is Real Talk. We discuss important issues impacting our world and how we, as humanity, can come together, overcome our obstacles, and move toward a bright and beautiful future. I'm Shay Sparks, here to ignite the light in the world. We invite you to check us out on unitednetwork.tv. And on today's Real Talk, we're talking about the power of the stars. Our guest today on Real Talk is one of the most watched astrologers on YouTube, Nadiya Shah. She is an international syndicated sun sign columnist, as well as the producer and host of her own web TV show. So, Nadia, thank you so much for being here. I'm excited about this topic.
Thank you so much for having me, Shay.
Well, you know, I am from that generation that back in the day when I was little, we would go to the library during study hall, open the teen magazine and the Cosmo magazine, and always look for our birth sign and our horoscope for the week. So is that what astrology is? Or tell us a little bit more what astrology exactly is.
So very simply, astrology is essentially as old as human documents exist. And it's this notion that human beings have understood for a really long time that we look up at the sky and in some way it may say something about what is happening here on Earth with our experience. And I actually love those sun sign columns. I love being a part of them as well. I previously wrote daily horoscopes for Canadian newspapers for many years as well. And the thing about daily horoscopes, or, you know, in those magazines, those teen magazines, as you mentioned, is that they have a very quiet philosophical affirmation, right? So essentially what they're saying is that connection is there, that connection with our environment. And I love being a part of that philosophical and very poetic affirmation in the world.
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful. I never thought about it like that, but it is kind of a philosophical affirmation. So that's great. So how did you get involved in astrology? And is there a history, not just with you in astrology, but the history of astrology?
Of course. So there's both. For me personally, I can say that I remember as a little girl looking up at the sky and feeling a connection to it. Yeah. And I've observed a lot of kids who do, right? They look up the sky at wonder and they go, wow, the moon, the stars. But I would say that astrology certainly is part of my family lineage. More immediately, my aunts and my mom, they were more like fans of astrology. And when I first started out professionally, I was 14 years old and I was hired to read palms at a fair. And so basically, yeah, the summer fair, I was reading palms. And immediately after that, my mom and my relatives started giving me astrology books and saying, hey, you're going to be good at this. And so I think that they just really wanted someone to do this in the family so that they didn't always have to go out and talk to people. And so I really think that to become an astrologer, it's one of those things that chooses you, because normally people aren't looking at it as a career option, if you will, right? But I'm glad it chose me. Good things have happened as a result.
And what is you talked about how astrology goes all the way back to the beginning of time. So how do you know the astrology, like what the history is of it?
Sure. So we know when we look at cave drawings, when we look at some of the oldest tablets that exist of human beings sort of documenting the sky, and we can see them trying to make sense of what they're seeing in correlation to what is happening here on Earth. And so there's something very innate about that, but we know that astrology as we know it today became more sophisticated, of course, as time went on. We see it in ancient Babylonia, ancient Egypt, but Western astrology today actually arises from a book called Tetrabiblos, which is about 2,000 years old. It was written in ancient Greece, and that's where we have these first documents of, and it sort of encapsulates the wisdom of the time. But that's where we see individual horoscopes start to arise and birth charts for example, start to arise. And in many ways, the techniques outlined there, although, of course, because astrology is a living practice and it adapts to whatever culture or whatever moment it finds itself in to serve the people of that culture. Yet, in many ways, those foundations remain strong. And so much of what we do today is still, we can trace back to that book and even further in its roots.
Mm. So I'm hearing it goes back 2000 years. So is it similar to something like the Bible or something like that that people have used and really studied and gone, got it. So, like in the Bible, they talk about the wise man following the North Star. So is it something like that that people really use as a guide to move to know more?
I think that we've always used it as a guide, right? Just the idea that it's an individual guide is at least 2000 years old. But this understanding of our connection to the sky is very old. I love that you mentioned the three wise men. And actually, when we look at, for example, in Latin America, I actually lived in Mexico for 10 years previously. And in Latin America, they have a day called the Day of the Three Kings, Tres Reyes. And this is to celebrate, it's normally right around the 6th of January, and it celebrates the three wise men, essentially. And this tends to be the day when gifts are given to children. But the astrology community in Latin America celebrates this as the Day of Astrologers as well. And so it's fascinating how we understand and we can see how so much of basically how many religions have been able to affirm their validity is in some way connected to some astrological phenomenon. Now, this is where I can really get my nerd hat on because I actually have a master's degree in cultural cosmology and divination. And so I had a chance to really study an understanding from an academic perspective, astrology and the world's religions. So this is where I really am so fascinated by how up until very recently in human history, astrology and religion were intimately tied. So they were, it really was priests who cultivated astrological practice and techniques and interpretations really up until the late 1700s. That was when we had that split into modern astrology, but you can't have what we know as astrology without religious leaders and practitioners leading the way.
I love that. And I love that you spoke about South America. So I visited the Mayan ruins in Chichen Itza. And it's been rumored, and maybe I'm getting it wrong, so please correct me if I do, is that the way it was built had to do with some of the pyramids were built, had to do with some of how the stars were aligned during that time.
Absolutely. So whenever you go to these ancient sites, especially I had a chance to visit so many of the ancient sites in ancient Maya, mostly in Mexico. All of them in some way align with astrological phenomenon. And all of them have astrological symbolisms as the Mayan people understood it of their time and how they cultivated their own astrology. And what's fascinating about Chichen Itza in particular, it is the most visited Mayan site in the world. And on the equinoxes, so when you go to Europe, so many of the sacred sites like Stonehenge, for example, Stonehenge aligns with the solstices. But it is in Latin America that we see many of the sites aligned with the equinoxes. And on the spring and autumn equinox, what's so fascinating is at sunset, the way in which the sun shines onto the pyramid itself, it creates the illusion of a snake. And it goes all the way down to the base of the pyramid, and you see the snake's head. And that is a fertility god. And so it's so fascinating to consider how we see this image show up of the fertility god impregnating the earth. And so, the phases of the sun are an astrological phenomenon as well.
Well, what I'm also hearing is that this is astrology can also be kind of used like Feng Shui was in designing a room or building the architecture of a building. So they're building these pyramids or these what do you want to call them? Shrines, right? That go along with the what the astrology is saying. I love that.
Absolutely. Now, what's interesting, usually Feng Shui, and I do love Feng Shui a lot. I incorporate so many of their principles in my own life, and it certainly helped me a lot too. But Feng Shui isn't necessarily rooted as much in specific astrological phenomenon as it is in cycles and cycles of humanity, and dates, for example. But the astrology and the calendar, the astrology itself, and how it connects to the sky is very special in and of itself.
I love it. Well, you talked a little bit ago about what inspired you to be a astrologer is that you were reading palms and at 14. And I don't know about you, but I've never read my palm at 14 and was like, yep, that's what it means. So how did that come about? Were you sitting around some family gathering and you just started going, hey, look what I can do? And
yeah, so I sort of grew up knowing that there was this like there were members of my ancestry that were, mystically inclined, put it that way. And so there was always that knowing there and an openness to more mystical understandings. But it was very synchronistic. It was so much by happenstance. So what happened was way back in the day, right, before everything went online, they have this big fair that happens in Toronto every year, where I was born and raised. And it's called the Canadian National Exhibition. And it's the last 3 weeks of summer. Every single year, they have this big event. It's like a fair and a gathering space, a cultural touchstone, if you will. And so every year, what would happen was a few weeks before the start of the CNE every year, they would have like a job fair day, and they would have these job boards and these tables, and all these kids would show up. Like myself, I showed up as a very young person, and you would choose a card from the wall, and then you'd go and you'd interview, and they'd hire you basically on the spot. And that's what happened. I just saw a sort of ambiguous card. I went, I talked to the person, and then they gave me a sheet of paper, and that sheet of paper had the drawing of a hand. And there were arrows coming out of that hand that said, this is your headline. This is your heart line. This is what it means if it goes up. This is what it means if it goes down. And they said to me, learn this and come back tomorrow. And the next day, literally, I was doing like 50, 70, 100 palm readings a day.
Wow.
Right? And I was constantly being told how good I was at it. And so that was like my start, just jumping in. But then I remember after that was over, how, my mom was bragging about the fact that I did this, and we would go to like parties for the family and people would put their hands in my face, and I didn't like that. I really did not like that. And so while they're simultaneously giving me astrology books, I was like, oh yeah, this feels like it really resonates. So that was a part of what ended up sort of separating the palm reading from the astrology. But, even palm reading, when you choose to learn a little bit about it, you see how even the hands are understood as connected to the sky. There's like the mound of Venus, there's the, solar mound and things like that. And so it's interesting how all of these different divinatory practices still have their connection in some way or another with astrological phenomenon.
I had no idea. That is so fascinating.
It's so interesting, isn't it? Just how astrology is so deeply woven into our understanding of ourselves and how to connect with the mystical, if you will.
Well, and you said selves, but I'm going to dive in even deeper and maybe suggest, because of your degrees and your studies, you'll know more. It's in our cells.
Yes. Isn't that powerful? Yes. Oh, yes. It's incredible to think of, like, for example, there's a notion of cellular memory, right? So we hold all of the wisdom of our ancestors with us, going all the way back, of course. You go far back enough, we all are connected to each other. All of humanity is connected to each other. So we hold that wisdom literally on a physical level in ourselves. But yeah, we all are born under the same sky. It may be different based on your birth time and chart, but we all have a sun sign, some sun sign. We all were born under the moon, whether it was a new moon or a full moon. And these are the things that unite us in so many ways and even more.
I love that, what you just said, especially about the ancestors part. And one, I will totally believe, and us at UNN believe, that we are connected. We are one humanity. And I love that you talked about your ancestors. So I'm just picturing you as a little girl sitting around your family, and what most people would have dinner talk of, how was your day? How's work? How's school? You're talking about astrology and stars. And, oh, did you see that the Mercury was in Venus and there was a Mercury retrograde and all of this sitting around? Is that what it was like growing up?
Well, I would say it was a slower integration than that. Like I said, it was like more like, oh, we had these wacky ancestors, and oh, my uncle used to do this and my great uncle used to do that. Like those kinds of stories pervaded. The more immediate family was more fans of these things. So I heard about, oh, I went for a reading, and oh, an astrologer told me this about you, so my mom telling me these things. And yeah, it was a lot like that, I would say.
Oh, that's fun. Because my conversations wasn't like that at all around my table. So I can only imagine how cool that would be. Well, I know that astrology can help us in everyday life. And I just have to know, because I'm a Leo, am I going to be married anytime soon? Is my husband on his way?
Well, what I can promise you is that you have a wonderful future, an absolutely beautiful future as a Leo. And for all those signs out there, this is my promise to you. Now, as far as when you're going to get married, look, whenever people ask me that, the first thing I always think, and I want to say to people is, do you want to be married? Like, that's the thing. Do you actually want that? What does that mean to you? Because even marriage means different things to different people. Freedom means different things to different people. And so how to find that understanding in the chart? Because we can look at the chart and say, hey, this is a really good time to do these types of activities. And then there are certain moments that say, hey, you could meet somebody who's a very significant partner to you. But, I think that the way we understand what marriage has evolved so much. And we live in times when more of us are older souls than ever before. I mean, there was a time when really you knew as a child who you were to marry, and it was decided for you. And that was it. That was going to be your life. You knew that your work would be whatever your parents did. And it was all staying within the same community. And really, there are some parts of the world where that's still a reality for some people. But we are so blessed that we actually have options. We have our free will. We have choice. And I think one way in which we can really see that we are older souls than ever is that it is very unusual now to have only one major relationship in a lifetime. It is more common to have more than one major relationship. Now, I have a theory around this, and my theory is that, because we used to be younger souls, when we interact with other souls and other people, we're essentially learning lessons. We're learning about ourselves. We're learning about each other, and we're growing, especially on spiritual levels. We have these soul contracts with other souls. And what used to take us 100 lifetimes to figure out in the context of a particular soul contract, now we get it in like 4 years, right? 7 years, right? Yep. We get, oh, that's the lesson. That's what I was meant to learn from you. Okay, now that's done. On to the next thing, on to the next one, right? And I also think that we are living in these wonderful times where we're encouraged to be more independent. So we're encouraged to know ourselves, to value that sense of self-knowledge, which is very powerful, and intentionally choose the alliances we have with other people. And that means if you're engaged in self-knowledge, you're going to grow, you're going to change, and certain alliances will grow and change with you, and some may not. But that deep connection we have to ourselves, and I would say, if you really want me to get nerdy with it, I think a lot of this is rooted in the Protestant Reformation. So this whole notion that took place about 500 years ago, where that was a fundamental shift between our understanding to our God, to the divine. that was the shift between needing an intermediary to tell you and to facilitate that connection to the divine, to you having a personal connection. And I think that was a big leap in consciousness for humanity, because that was when we said, wow, if I am worthy of reading the Bible and deciding for myself what it means, then that means that light of the divine is within me too. I don't need anybody to stand in the middle of that to make sense of it for me. It is in me already. And I think that was really a very powerful shift in human consciousness, where we decided to honor our individual journeys along with the connections and the relationships we had with each other.
I love this. Thank you so much for sharing that. One day it will happen. But I think what I think is so important to take away from what you just said is how, one, we're old souls, and how we are interdependent even when we're in relationship, because we're moving forward. We're moving quicker than we ever before. You said 4 years or 7 years, but sometimes I go through I shouldn't say go through relationships. I meet people and it's like 90 days. I'm like, oh yeah. Or one coffee. Oh, yep. I learned that lesson. Thank you. So I love that you said that.
Oh yes. I so relate to that. Yeah. Oh yes.
Yeah.
And, even if you think about it, careers, it's very unusual now for a person to only have one career. It wasn't that long ago in human history. I mean, really, you're just not even going back 100 years. We're looking at the 50s, right? It was normal to, you graduate high school and immediately you go into a corporate job and you're there for 25 years and you retire. And that was the reality for a huge number of people. That's just so unusual now.
Yeah. You're so right. In fact, that's one of the things I do in my coaching world is help people in that transition of, okay, what's next for me? Because they're feeling restless. They're feeling like it's not meaningful anymore. So I really help them dive in to find that meaning. And I think that's one of the lessons. If you agree or not, let me know. But it really about how we've come to a point in our generations, maybe in our world, where we do work at a job, we find what we're looking for. The teacher is ready when the student appears, and then we become the teacher. The student is ready when the teacher appears. At one point, we become the teacher, and then we're like, okay, it's time to move on to what's next.
And sometimes it's the universe that decides it's time for you to move on, right? Like, for example, if you get fired from your job, that is a very, very clear sign from the universe that you no longer need to be there. That is not part of your path anymore, that environment, that whatever the case may be. And it's very powerful to consider how there are times when we take the lead, we listen to ourselves, we're able to make those changes, but we have varying needs within us. And as much as we desire and thrive on change and growth, there's something within us, and especially depending on your disposition, meaning your sign, for example, many of us also want security. We want stability. We want to feel like we're able to do something very well and to do it repeatedly. And so both are valid. And there are times when the impetus to change will come from within. And there are times when the universe doesn't give you a conscious choice anyways. And then there are times when the external environment just makes it so challenging that you can't help but make a change. But all are valid. All get you to the same place of growth and becoming something more than you were before.
I love this, Nadia. Thank you for sharing so much of your wisdom with us. So let's take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll learn more about the natal charts, or charts as she talked about, and why they are important.
Hello and welcome to United Network News. I'm Sunny Gold. Now let's check in with our ground command, Kimberly Gogan, from the Office of the Guardian. And she has her whiteboard. Hi, Kim.
Thank you.
sure if it's going to be. It's up to me. It's up to all of us to come together. I'm Sunny Galt. Join us Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for The Real News.
And welcome back to Real Talk. Before the break, we were talking with Nadiya Shah about the power of the stars through astrology. So Nadia, we just briefly touched on the word chart, and I'm sure that it goes into what's called a natal chart. Is that correct?
Yes. So there's charts of a moment. That moment could be the present moment. It could be moments that are coming up for the collective. And then, of course, there's your birth chart as well. So that moment that you take your first breath, there's the understanding that you, through that first breath, become connected to everyone and everything. And symbolically, it is the astrological chart or the natal chart that becomes a snapshot of what that connection may be.
So can you tell us what actually the snapshot is? So I know I've done mine. So for those who have no idea what it looks like, what information do you need to know in order to have a natal chart done?
So of course we need the date of birth. That is first. Ideally, you have the time of birth as well and the place of birth. These are going to be really important to getting as precise a chart, a snapshot as possible. But when we get that moment of the first breath down, we're able to look at that moment, that second of time where the planets were, especially in relation to you and in relation to each other. And what that might say about how you understand and integrate different needs that you may have as part of being a complex human being in this lifetime. Now, I would also add, one person who had a huge influence, an astrologer who lived about 850 years ago. He was also a Sufi mystic. And I wrote my master's dissertation on him, and his name is Ibn Arabi. And Ibn Arabi believed that the chart is perfect. The chart is exactly everything that you need it to be, to do all the things that you're meant to do in a higher, more loving understanding of all that your life could be. And so the chart becomes something that is a promise that you could fulfill if you seek to understand and be open and align yourself with it. And if you seek to understand how every experience, every emotion, every yearning, every elation that you experience is a part of a fulfillment of that higher, more loving wisdom, well, that's when we get even more powerful glimpses into what that, higher fulfillment of your life could be. And so, yes, there are people born under different types of skies, if you will, and we may judge it as challenging or easier. And sure, that's one way to look at it, but I think it's really valuable to look at the chart with that curiosity coming from the assumption that this could be perfect. And if this is perfect, how could I tap into this, my connection to everyone and everything, to really align myself with what a higher, more loving vision for my life could be? Because sometimes, we're human. That's the thing. We are human. If we're lucky, we get a glimpse into what that could be. If we're lucky, we get the opportunity to cultivate the skill of listening to our lives, of listening to ourselves. And the chart can help us in that journey. I think that's really powerful. It's a powerful way to understand astrology as a tool. It's not something happening to us. It's something that is just there to be another aid to illuminate something that we may need to understand about ourselves.
Well, I love that you said the snapshot of our first breath. And just thinking back to my own chart and seeing where the planets are at the moment that I did have that snapshot of my first breath, now listening to you explain it really allows me to see how we are all connected under that same sky in that particular moment.
We really are, aren't we? Because we all have a snapshot, but it's the same sky. It's very powerful to contemplate.
So, what are the benefits of knowing what your natal chart is, and how can it help you to move forward in maybe a place that you're stuck?
Well, I think the chart can provide you with a symbolic look at your life. And so, in a way, it kind of takes you out of perhaps sometimes the intensity of the experience of your life. It allows you to take that little bit of a step back and to look at life from that symbolic, you could even say higher perspective. What could you be learning right now? What skills are coming forward within you? What opportunities are within yourself that your external environment might be able to match? But more importantly, I would say there's something to be said for cycles, of course. There's your chart, but then also what the planets right now are doing to that chart, which is called transits. So how the planets right now are speaking to, in mathematical precision, with the charts at the time of your first breath, that is something that astrologers look at as well. But innately, just looking at the natal chart can give you very powerful tools of understanding of self, but also ways in which to really contemplate your life so that you feel that much more empowered, that much more aware of, okay, this is what I actually need. I'm telling myself I need this, but that's coming from a different place within me. And so, for example, sometimes people will come and say, what is my life purpose? I know that's something a lot of astrologers have been asked again and again. What is my life purpose? Now, what I've found is often when people are saying that and asking that, they are actually looking for a type of emotional equilibrium. They want to be at peace. That's it, that they want to feel at peace with themselves and with their life. Now, what gives you peace is going to be a different thing than simply saying, okay, what might your purpose be? Because the truth is, this moment is your purpose. Right here in this moment, however you might judge it, it is part of the fulfillment of a higher, more loving vision for your life. Simply maybe approaching the present moment with that lens, with that curiosity, especially looking at the chart with that curiosity. Wow, can that be a very powerful way to just change your whole perspective and help people find that peace that they're actually seeking?
I love that. So a natal chart is a way to explore our curiosity and to find our peace.
Our peace, ourselves, a glimpse into the mystery of our lives. Because really, when you think about it, there's this incredible dichotomy to life. On the one hand, it goes so fast, right? It's just a split second of a flash. But on the other hand, it's so magnificent. It's so meaningful. It's so grand. And it's interesting to look at the chart for, well, how can you find that middle ground of humility, that understanding that this lifetime is but a moment as part of your soul's incredible journey. According to Ibn Arabi, really, we are here to fully understand the energy of what he called God, right? God itself. We are the breath of God. We are new ways in which God itself gets to experience itself in ways that it would not have had you not been there to experience that exact emotion, that elation, that challenge, that yearning, that longing. And so if you can look at the chart, then there's something about knowing that there's a perfection playing out in what feels so challenging. It's very affirming and ultimately can help you to gain what this moment is actually about, which is about the cultivation of wisdom and your embodiment of the divine itself, however you understand that.
The cultivation of wisdom. That's beautiful, really. So how would someone want to find their chart? I know there's a couple of apps out there, or do you recommend hiring an astrologer?
Well, look, whatever path you're called towards, there's lots of resources online, super easy to find. Calculate my birth chart. That'll do it, right? Lots of resources will come up. There's lots of apps out there as well. But of course, if it is that you find an astrologer online, I mean, especially now, it's so easy to stay open and connect with the different ways in which astrologers will approach the sky. So the thing is, astrologers will always reveal to you what they believe about the world based on what they are perceiving and how they are interpreting it. And so if you're like me, because I'm of the belief that the universe is wise and loving, that's the title of one of my books as well, because I really believe in that perfection so strongly. And I believe that that is really the higher purpose behind what I do as an astrologer. And so I am going to look at the sky. I'll look at what Venus is, doing an aspect to Pluto, for example, just off the top of my head. I'm going to interpret that with a different lens than someone who believes the world is, unfair or fatalistic, or there's, these forces. And I'm not saying either is right or wrong. I'm just saying that certain astrologers are going to align with you and what you understand and what you desire to have affirmed more than others might. And now, because there's so many astrologers online, whether they're writing, whether they're creating video or podcasts, it's easier than ever to be open and to find people, and especially like-minded people, even astrologers who are like-minded, who can interpret your chart with a lens that's going to work for you. It isn't about lying to you and telling you that everything is Pollyanna when it really isn't. No, you still want somebody to validate your experience and be honest with you, but the sense you make of what could be taking place, that is going to be rooted in an astrologer you resonate with. And there's lots of us out there, easier than ever to find us.
Well, I know that you can Google it, but then is there do you interview them? Do you kind of watch what they do on social media, or do you have a one-on-one conversation? What would you recommend?
Well, I would say, I don't know about you, but for me, there are people I watch online. I don't really watch other astrologers very much because I don't want to accidentally plagiarize somebody. That really is the reason. Although, because I do have an astrology school called Synchronicity University, I'm always on the lookout for, up and coming brilliant astrologers, because I love celebrating other people. That's also something about my mission as well, is to celebrate other people. But, I don't know about you, but there are people I watch online that I may never communicate with, never have an interaction with, but they become part of your life, right? For me, I know I've created a weekly video. I've been on YouTube since 2008, and I've had a weekly podcast that goes out on YouTube, now on Spotify video, audio podcasts as well. And so people literally feel like I am in their kitchen with them every Sunday morning, right? They feel like I'm sitting with them at their table while they're having lunch. They feel a relationship. They feel a connection with me. And I feel very grateful for that. But I also know what that feels like, because I feel that connection with different social commentators and creators online as well. And so I would say start there. Who do you feel connected to? Who do you feel called towards? And stay open to where it is that your own inclination and your own intuition might take you.
Got it. So yeah, just listen and hear what's going on the inside to say, okay, is this the right person for me?
That's so powerful. I always tell people, trust yourself above and beyond anything else, right? I say, trust yourself and be yourself. And that includes the need to approach any astrologer with that lens as well, right? We as astrologers should always have humility, I believe. And I know that the overwhelming majority of your audience may not be astrologers, but you want to have enough confidence to know that you have the skills, you're bringing the skills to the moment, but at the same time, the person in that moment, they know something about themselves. And when we nurture that, when we affirm that, I think that's when we really serve as healthier conduits to our clients rather than a dependence. You never, no matter who it is, a doctor, a lawyer, an astrologer, whatever the case may be, you don't want somebody who's going to ask you to be dependent on them. That's never good. And so I do what I do to empower people. And that means I always tell people, trust themselves above and beyond anything else. But when you do that, yeah, there are going to be some astrologers you like more than others, some creators, content providers, leaders, writers, that you will like and you will gravitate to more than others. Trust that. Absolutely.
Well, I love that we're talking about the natal chart, because way back when I had mine, we're talking many years ago, I was new to the whole idea of it. And again, I'm a Leo. So, of course, one of the things that they said was, you're egotistical. And I was like, what? No, I am not egotistical. I refuse to be that. And I made that choice. So it's kind of like what you're talking about, is about really being able to have the free will to choose how we want to show up.
Yeah. And remember, any energy has a spectrum of realization from which it can come forward. And sure, and I know that this is kind of arbitrary. I'm about to say lower vibration, higher vibration, but I would think if you're egotistical, yeah, it's a lower vibration, right? The higher vibration of Leo is to trust your heart, to know that you are worthy of your own love and care, to know that you are worthy of listening to within yourself. You are worthy of feeling good about yourself as you are right now today. There's a huge difference between the two. The egotistical, that's a mask. That's why it's a lower vibration. It is there to mask the insecurity. The desire to be more than others is different than the desire to be the best that you can be. And so, yeah, it's great that you understood very early on that, no, you are here to access the higher vibration of that Leo energy. That says a lot about self-knowledge, self-awareness.
Well, thank you for saying that. You made my day. And I love that you said about really being able to tap into the self-knowledge of what you're reading, and being able to, like we talked about just a little bit ago, you're listening, you're reading it, you're absorbing the information, and then being able to discern it from your higher vibrational self, rather than looking at it from the lens of maybe the person who gave me that chart was from a lower vibration. That never occurred to me until this conversation. That makes so much sense.
Yeah, you can't have astrology without the astrologer. And the astrologer is doing the interpretation, but ultimately that is an act of poetry. And so what you want, just like certain poets, you're going to love and feel an affinity for more than others. Certain songwriters who are poets, you're going to feel more than others. Yeah, it's the same way. Stay open to those who speak the poetic language of your heart, and that'll guide you to the insights you need.
I love that. I love that. So since we're talking about planets and charts, I'm just curious, on a broader sense, has there been a point in time that you saw the planet shift, and that you were dreading, or that you were surprised of what might happen?
Well, look, every astrologer has had that. I'll tell you, there's a lot of people come to an astrologer because they're dreading something that they see coming up, right? And yeah, sometimes there are things that can feel like, oh my God, what could happen, because there's like this spectrum of realization. Right. And, I think that's where the faith that, you can't prevent bad things from happening. It's a part of life. We are here to learn, we're here to grow, and as part of the world we've co-created together, challenges happen, and some people have greater challenges through their life than other people might. But we can have the faith that whatever happens, we will be able to navigate it. We will find a way to tap into it, to do something with it, whether it's just learn about ourselves, cultivate wisdom, perhaps with the intention, become more loving, choose not to have whatever happens, have us become more jaded. These are very powerful intentions to bring whatever may happen. So we can't prevent bad things from happening. Now, if you look at something that's challenging coming up in the chart, I, with my full knowing and insight and optimism, because I'm a very optimistic person, and I think you can tell I'm a spiritual person, I'm a philosophical person. I like that about myself. And it really has helped me to navigate challenging times in my own life. Even with that, sometimes I'll have moments when I'll be like, oh goodness, this is happening. This could happen, that could happen. But it's about choosing to participate in the creation of things being as good as they can be from my end, and then having faith and trusting the universe that whatever happens is ultimately part of that magnificent breath, as Ibn Arabi called it, right? That full embodiment of love and wisdom that we're here to learn about and to grow towards over this lifetime.
Well, I love that you said about the love and wisdom, because for me, when I think about all the challenging times that we go through, it's not about what happens to you, it's what happened for you.
That's a beautiful way to put it. Absolutely. And, I get fear. I completely understand that. And the thing is that very often, if you just acknowledge all the things you're afraid of and you just get it out of you, very often that stuff doesn't happen, right? Very often it's that the universe brings something else you hadn't anticipated. But at least with astrology, we can understand it and explore it symbolically. And we can look at, what does mythology tell us? Because, earlier we were talking about, how did the ancients understand the sky? Well, you have to also consider that up until very recently in human history, television was the sky, right? Like that's all we had, right? We didn't hang around with our TV trays looking at each other like really at night after we ate, once we were okay, all we really had to look at was the sky or each other, and that was it. And so the ancients became really good at documenting certain cycles, and they became really good at understanding what mythologies and core energies are correlating to certain constellations, certain planetary alignments that are taking place. And so to be able to see how whatever you're experiencing, whatever you're living, actually, there's a myth for that, right? There's a mythological story that matches that. I think that can be a very powerful way to understand, at the very least, that you're not alone, but also to learn from it, to grow through it, to become something more.
Absolutely, to become something more. Which brings me to my next question is, what message do you have for us for the future? What does it look like? Should we, you mentioned fear. How can we have an optimistic look when everything else that we watch is so full of fear?
Well, I think it's valuable to find balance in what you're watching. So it's fine to watch things that feel, dire. It happens, right? We're going to come across information like that from time to time, things that frustrate us. But it's very valuable as well to sort of have a balancing point where you're able to stay connected to the things that make you feel at peace with yourself, at peace with your choices, that help remind you that, there's actually a lot of good in the world. There's actually a lot of love in the world. And, as much as we can hear awful things happening in the world, in our environments, in our cities, the truth is that there's way more love. That's the thing. There's a lot more love, but it doesn't get that jolt out of us, right? It doesn't get that all-encompassing moment of a reaction. And so I'll give you an example. For me personally, I feel very connected to animals, especially pets. It's a deep passion of mine to be a part of more kindness, more love towards animals to the best of my ability. I was raised to donate a significant, a percentage of your income should always go to charity. That's what I was raised to believe. And a lot of those charities are animal charities, to care for them, to love them. Yes. And I know that there are stories out there that are dreadful, but my goodness, are there extraordinary stories of so much love, so much care. And I had this experience recently where I was, thinking about something I'd heard that was just awful and horrendous. And it was in my mind and I was feeling such sadness. And I walked into a store and there was a dog there with their owner. And I smiled at the dog and the dog immediately came to me for love, right? Which happens all the time, I'll tell you. They just know something. And my friends always comment about this as well. And the love and the trust in that moment, the way it just healed me of the sadness I was feeling was so powerful. And I'll tell you, you can find that everywhere in whatever it is that upsets you. I promise you, there is a counter to that. And it's not getting more upset, although even getting upset has its value, because that can provide us with motivation and determination for things to be different. But let's not forget the love, because there's so much love in whatever it is that calls you. I promise you, there's an abundance of love on offer as well.
It brings tears to my eyes, because I think that the dogs give out the most amazing energy. And whenever I see a dog, I immediately am like, oh my God, hi, hi, hi. Like that, like in my head. I don't even know if maybe I say it out loud. And immediately the dogs are like attacking me, like jumping on me. They're so excited to see me. So I love that you talk about that.
I love dogs so much. And I think that there's something, there's a light in all of us, right? A light that we share, that going back to that magnificent breath. That magnificent breath is a part of everyone and everything. It's a part of you, yes, but it's a part of every living being, every tree, and the planets as well. And it's tapping into that. It just reminds us that we are never alone. You know, we live in a time where we live in closer spaces than ever, in crowded cities than ever before, but we feel more isolated from each other than ever before in human history as well. And it's very powerful to consider how, when we know we're connected to the planets, it takes us out of what Max Weber called the iron cage of postmodernism, right? It takes us out of that pain of that isolation. And if we're connected to the planets, then it reasons that we must be connected to each other as well. We must be connected to everyone and everything as well. And it just changes your experience of life when you walk around the world seeing things from that perspective.
Well, your passion exudes you. So thank you for sharing your passion with us. And I know that you have a training that you do for up and coming astrologers. So please share with us more about that.
So I have a few different things. If people want to find me online, synchronicityuniversity.com. Now that is where I'm, a true Aquarius. I believe in being of service to the masses. And so for me, one of the very famous things we do at my school is choose your tuition rate. And so you can learn from some of the most celebrated astrologers on the planet today for as low as just $5 a class at my school. And I'm so proud of that. Yeah. And so you can find me and really best-selling authors, astrologers, living legends you can find, and up-and-coming superstars you can find at synchronicityuniversity.com. My books as well, you can find them wherever books are sold, including on Amazon. Now, I have 5 books out so far, working on the 6th right now, and I hope that you enjoy them. They look at all different aspects of astrology. And the one thing I really love that I think helps my work to stand out is that I always spend time in the beginning of the book to talk about the philosophical assertion that's being made here, so that you really contemplate and consider the history and to approach the practice with reverence and awareness. And then we get into the techniques if you're so inspired for that as well, right? And so there's my books, and of course online on social media, especially my YouTube channel. If you just put Nadiya Shah Astrology, no matter how you spell it, you will find me there. So I look forward to connecting with your audience online.
Oh, well, I look forward to carrying this conversation on again. So thank you so much for sharing your time with us today.
Thank you so much, Shay.
And thank you for being here and listening to The Real Talk. Real Talk is also available on podcast that you can subscribe to on your favorite podcasting app. You can also visit unitednetwork.tv or download our network app on iOS, Android, Roku, Apple TV, and Fire TV. I'm Shay Sparks, and this is Real Talk for the Real World.